Guys, so moving on from the first part of this exercise, before we jumped into the actual colors that we used last week to make the color palette, I revisited the Dollar Tree and found this nice roll of craft paper for $1 and some colored pencils, and we just did the 3-crayon method using the kind of warmth of the paper and then a warm kind of scarlet red to kind of get some of the ruddiness of a skin tone, and then black for shadows and white for highlights. And we kind of got an illusion of reality. So that was a good introduction to the color temperature kind of concept that you want to keep in your mind when mixing and matching colors. Now we're going to kind of add yellow into it, and we're going to jump into paint, and we're going to go through how to mix and match and place color. I've got the exact same kind of supplies we had last week, just from the dollar store. White, Crafter Square acrylic paint, yellow ochre by Rich Art, scarlet red and black by Rich Art, all $1. And then I'm just painting on a piece of chipboard. The nice thing about acrylic paint versus oil is you can paint on almost anything, so it's just a piece of cardboard. And then all these brushes were $1, so you know, $5 in all, not too bad. We can get a nice painting done. I'm going to stick with the theme of hands, just because I think it'll be a little bit easier warm-up exercise instead of jumping right into the face. And I'm not sure how quick these are going to dry. They might dry, since they're acrylic, they'll dry a lot quicker than water-soluble oils. I've also got my water, some napkins on hand, and then I've got this like palette paper. You could just use a disposable plate. Just make sure, like whatever you're painting on, that you've got something underneath, because it is acrylic paint, so it can be kind of a mess when it dries. I like to start, so in this pack, we've kind of got some softer, the brown brushes, and some firmer, coarser brushes, the white brushes. I always like just to start with my drawing with kind of my darker color. So the darkest color I've got is the black. It's nice and neutral too. The nice thing too is this cardstock actually matches the craft paper pretty closely. So we kind of a nice one-to-one. So we want to start with just a quick drawing. It can be fairly loose. Nice thing about paint is you just paint over when you need to correct. So, get my reference. I'm going to lay in a quick linear sketch here, just using a soft round. I like to draw with that. It's kind of like a pencil. And then my dark color and a little bit of water to thin it out so it's more like ink, easier to draw with. And I'm just going to, again, start how we always do, using straights, getting my proportions right. Doesn't have to be 100% correct, but just proportionally pretty accurate, and then separation of light and darks. So I did that quick lay-in, kind of starting, pretty with the straight lines, and then moving into more smaller curves, and then just a separation of light and shadow. And I kind of was watering down to kind of get some subtle halftones. The drawing is not perfect, but since we're going to be overpainting with a lot of this stuff, I figured I can kind of hopefully correct a lot of that in the painting process. If you wanted to take a longer amount of time on this and get a really tight drawing, you could even do it in pencil. Separating the light and darks in pencil, and that might be another approach. Just for quickness of this lesson, I kind of went with a thin wash, but definitely it's not going to be as accurate as if you spent your time on a tight drawing. But the other reason I kind of did this looser approach is because today I don't want you to get too caught up in drawing. I think it's going to be hard to get really gradual form turns like we do in charcoal or in oil. Not impossible, but more difficult with this quick drying medium. It doesn't seem to dry too quick on this plastic or when it's in piles, but as soon as I put it on here, this is already starting to dry up. So for quickness, and I think this stuff will actually be really helpful for this exercise, that's what I like to call a poster study. In class, we've done value poster studies where we just do the white of the paper, a halftone, and then a dark, and we kind of it's the same thing as looking at like the hand like this and saying, okay, shadow, halftone, highlight. We kind of want to do the same thing, but we want to do it with paint. And it's really hard to do because it's always easy to go back in and kind of adjust paint before it dries. But what happens is you get really muddy. So we're going to kind of take the same concepts as this, add the yellow paint instead of the kind of toned paper, but still try and stick to that strong value pattern that we assess, and put it down there and leave it down there. So again, this is really nice because it actually gives us a mid-tone to paint onto, so I don't have to get a ton of stuff covered. Like I would usually just go in and tone a lot of this back, but it's already toned, so that's good. But I'm still going to start, I think, in my shadow shapes. I'm going to try and match those. So I'm going to rinse this brush out. Always make sure to rinse these out as soon as you're done because the acrylic will dry in them and ruin them. If worse comes to worse, you can leave it in the water, but that's not really great for the hair either to be pressing on the bottom of the dish like that. So just try and get them as clean as you can. Definitely after this session, I would clean it with soap and water because you don't want to leave any. I'm going to stick with the soft brush for my darks just to keep them nice and thin. I'm going to start in my dark area. Now, if you watch the pencil 3 crayon technique, we went over the value of each of these colors, and that's the first thing we want to do. We've kind of set up our lights and darks, so we've done the first step of value. Now the second thing is to kind of get a little bit more accurate. Like this shadow in there is getting a lot of reflected light because the light's coming in, hitting the palm of the hand, bouncing back, and since the palm is so warm, this is going to warm and lighten that shadow shape, a lot more so than over here. And when I'm looking down at this shadow shape, I actually see that it's not straight black. You know, there might be some notes of black in there, but more so I see this little hint of red, and it's going to add, just like on our color chart, a little bit of chroma. I've got this up next to me just to see kind of, it's helpful because it kind of helps you navigate color space a little bit. You know, if I mix red and black, I'm going to get a violet. If I add white, it's going to cool it off. So I like to keep this nearby just to know, so I know what I'm going to get. So this is still really dark. There's a little bit of warmth. I like that. I'm going to go a little bit, not going to change anything. I'm just going to make more of it so I can apply it pretty thickly. Soft brush. And then since I went kind of loose in the beginning, it's nice and freeing, but then that just means I have to redraw every time I place brush to canvas or to chipboard. So I'll come in here and kind of rechecking everything I assumed was right. And then a poster study is just that. It's kind of a posterization of all of the soft rounded forms of the hand or of any matter, subject matter you're doing. So don't be afraid to oversimplify. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave that. I see a really similar color in here, so I'm just going to change that. All I see the difference in this shadow shape over here that kind of trails along the fingers is that it gets a little bit lighter and a little bit more warm. So I'm adding some red to it. Now the red, knowing your colors, and the point of the color chart was to kind of get familiar with the pigments, we know that the opacity in the red is actually going to lighten that as well. So I don't need to add any white. Because white will lighten, but it'll also cool. So we don't want to do that. We just want to lighten and warm. So I'm going to go for this cad red with a little bit of opacity. I'm going to go in here and place these shadow shapes along the index finger. It wraps around. And as it comes down, it's starting to get a little lighter, a little bit darker, I see. So that's about as far as I can go with that one. Kind of see that same, maybe a little bit more. You know, that's going to lighten it drastically, almost too much. And I'm going to have to go back in and take some of my original mixture, mix it in there. And that's just because I see, now when I look down here, I saw it got even a little bit warmer, a little bit lighter, kind of on the orange side, so I just added some yellow. A little bit warmer, a little bit more red. So see how subtle these adjustments are? I'm just trying to identify the value shift and the temperature shift. A little bit more orangey, but not like drastically. I guess I'm trying to say I'm trying to match this realistically. If you want to paint expressively, the same technique works. You just have to press your understanding of it or push it a little bit further. So if I was noticing like, hey, the shadow was warm, a lot warmer than over here, I could go crazy and expressive with it and add a lot of this into here and get really brilliant hot warms for in here. As long as I'm recognizing like which direction I'm pushing that temperature. If I recognized it incorrectly and added coolness into here, then it would destroy the illusion of this being like realistic, and then it no longer becomes realistic. It might become expressive but incorrect. So you can keep it correct and make it more expressive by just sticking to these like truths of value and temperature and just pushing them. So keeping it dark, pushing the temperature extra warm, it's going to make a really expressive color. Maybe it could go lighter than it actually is, but maybe you still want to stick relative to what's around it, so you don't want to go so light that destroys any structure or form in there. So there's some of the kind of deep dark anchor points. Now I can move into some of the, they're not quite halftones, they're still in shadow. I'm noticing that it's actually picking a lot of like maybe the blueness, the coolness under there, and then back here, it's not a cold color because it's still a violet. So I'm going to do red and black, but it's not as dark as what I've got going on over here, so maybe a touch of white just to pull out that coolness. It's going to give me maybe something in between these two. Again, comparing to what I have down, knowing that it needs to go lighter, but stay cool, so I wouldn't add yellow. And be bold with this. If you're feeling confident with the color you mixed, go ahead and place it down boldly on your painting. Draw with it boldly. You have the freedom here because it's a poster study, so we're not going for kind of soft gradations. We're going to go, it's kind of like we're stacking tiles again, and just trying to kind of make like a really simplified, fractured poster study, but keeping true to our value and temperature. Just a lot less shifts, I guess. Trying to get the big relationships. So feel free to kind of go in here and just draw really boldly. As you add more and more, a lot of these will get covered up too, and you can get more specific. So start bold, and we can work towards more tightly rendered thing. Okay, so I'm going to keep in this same process, just asking myself as I kind of turn out of these shadows, turn into halftones. Let's do one more set, kind of coming down here. The fingers are still in halftone, much like this. They're getting a lot of kickback reflected light, so I'm seeing a lot of warmth in there. They're still in the shadow area, so I'm kind of mixing out of this shadow average puddle. But they're kind of turning a lot more orangey warm, just because I think they're picking up a lot of that reflected light off the palm, which has a lot of warmth and orange to it. So I'm going to lean on these oranges, but I don't want it to get so light that it looks like it's in the light. I want it to be in the shadow because it's a reflected light in the shadow. If you're ever wondering if it's kind of got too much going on, I just like to go over and place it or surrounded by gray just to see what it kind of looks like by itself, and that feels good. So I'm seeing that kind of all over the place, even up in here. Even though I mixed it for down here, we kind of can bounce it around and use it while we've got it mixed up. Because remember, the acrylic dries quick, so we want to use it while we've got it. Just another reason to paint boldly. That's probably too dark for over there. Okay, so I'm going to continue that. I'm going to move from the halftones towards more of the half lights now. Over here, we're staying, it stays pretty warm just because I think of the local tone and ruddiness of my fingers. Over here, though, you'll probably see me add a lot more white to lighten because we're getting pretty cool as we're moving away from the pads to more of like the thinner skin, especially back here on the wrist. But I'm just asking myself the exact same questions as I compare it to what I've already got down. Does it go lighter, darker, and then warmer or cooler? You really have two options of both. You kind of have a light cool and a dark cool, and a light warm and a darker warm. I took the same approach, kind of just filling in the halftones, asking myself lighter, darker, warmer, cooler throughout. The entire time it's felt a little bit cold to me. I've been really pushing it warm, and I think, I might be wrong, but I think it's because in the reference image there's so much cool background, and in mine I have so much warm background, so it's a great example of how just relative color and color temperature is. The whole hand feels really cold. So I think I'm going to go in and put in a gray background, just black and white, my two coolest colors, and hopefully that'll make all of the warmth I've been pumping in here, the yellow and the red, seem a lot more warm. Just right now it's very mellowed out because it's surrounded by such a warm color. For our kind of practice poster study, I think it's all right. I would recommend, if you want this to be a true poster study where you're mixing color and laying down kind of flat tiles, and you don't want to blend it, but you want to practice your looking at your reference, mixing color, and placing it, to let some of these layers, maybe do your darks, let them dry, do your lights, let them dry. That way, they're not going to pull up and mix. I got some mixing kind of overall because I was just trying to get this done in a timely manner. So I did get some mixing. But if you want it to be a true poster study, you kind of don't want those to disturb the underlayers, and you just want to kind of lay them over the top ones. But you can see how once you start building up, you can start to get a lot more true to your reference because it becomes a lot more relative. When I just put the darks down, they were way too cold, and in places way too dark, so I had to go back, and then when I put the lights in, I had to go back and adjust those. This ended up getting a lot more warmer. Definitely getting the background helped, so I'd recommend doing that for yours. But the same process, drawing, light, shadow, and then start with your like kind of dark average, and then just ask yourself, okay, coming into the reflected light, does it get lighter or darker, and warmer or cooler? Those are the two kind of questions you want to keep in your mind this entire time. Everything should be based off of that. Same thing for the lights and the halftones. As we're pulling out the shadow, it's obviously probably going to get lighter. Start with an average, then kind of modulate it off of that. It will help to kind of identify the color temperature of your light source. So in the reference, this is a kind of a neutral light source, but I think the whiteness kind of glaring off the skin does have a cool effect. So compared to all of the really warm halftones and skin tones in there, it has a kind of a cooler light source. And that might explain why we get so much heat and reflected light warmth in here in the shadows, because it's bumped up against the cold light, so it makes it seem a lot warmer. Same thing, you can kind of see, it was hard to get with these colors, but I was trying to get a nice dark but also warm light back here that was really dark and really warm, and you can kind of achieve that by going pretty dark and then putting like a nice little warm borderline on there to show that it's warm. It was about as close as I could get. But try not to blend these, try just to mix, match, lay it down, and just have fun with this first one. If you want to tackle something easy, do kind of the fist again with less digits. The more digits, the more kind of tiles you have to place on there. So the bigger and the simpler the forms, the better.